You're live. Hey, everybody. You know the routine. 4 o'clock, top of the hour. Going to grab the link here, share it across social media, and then we will get started.
Mobile popped over this wireless battery bank for an unboxing.
You know, it just never fails. I told it, don't do commercials. There shouldn't be any ads, but there they are. That's all right. We had one ad that came on one time, and it was for birth control, and this woman's voice comes on, and she says all these. It was like, whew, look out. Like right when I started, I had to like quickly mute it. You guys remember that? I think her name was Kara. She's like, hi, I'm Kara, and blah, 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 blah. Whatever. All right. Hello, everyone. Couple minutes and then we'll get started, folks. Hang in there. The weather is definitely yucky today. All right. Man, so many different places to post stuff. And heavy rain moving in.
Of course there is.
High risk for flooding in parts of the Carolinas today. All right, let's get the title screen up. We'll bring Colby back soon enough. All right, thanks for waiting. Almost ready here. All right, let's start, shall we? Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Mark Sott of HurricaneTrack.com. Welcome to another live broadcast of Hurricane U, the patron and crowdfunding supported educational series that we broadcast live on YouTube from time to time. So glad you could join me this afternoon. Today we're going to discuss emergency management. A lot of people hear about that, and maybe you don't know the ins and outs of it, and so that's what today's topic is all about. An introduction, if you will, to the world of emergency management and how that crisscrosses what we have to deal with when we deal with hurricanes and other disasters. But since this is hurricane focused, we will primarily be dealing with the topic of how emergency management and emergency managers work to do what they do to help keep you safe during hurricanes and other emergencies. It's interesting, one of the very first people that helped with my career, long time ago, more than 25 years ago now, was an emergency management director. He still is, and his name is Dan Summers. He's down in Collier County. Great place to be in the Naples area. And he had a big influence on the early part of my career. And so I've got I studied geography, but I had a lot of exposure to how emergency management worked in the early days of my career. And that really helped for me to develop an understanding and an appreciation of what those folks go through and how it all works to keep communities safe. So our guest today is Colby Sawyer. I met Colby through social media because he knew about me, and then we eventually met on the Outer Banks at Five Guys right there in the, what is it, Kill Devil Hills, I think it is, a couple of years ago. And we have stayed in touch ever since. Colby right now, emergency management specialist up in Chatham County, North Carolina. That's the Raleigh-Durham area. And so he's not on the Outer Banks anymore, but his many years of experience out there will help with today's discussion as we talk about how all of this works and what it's all about, what you can take away from it and learn as we go forward into the hurricane season. All right, let's get the Apple to cooperate. There he is, live from Chatham County in the heart of North Carolina. Now, I will say this. Colby is also a Seahawk alumnus.
That's right.
Yep, University of North Carolina, Wilmington, just like I did. Get the volume up a little more. All right. By the way, big thanks to my daughter, Mallory, for letting me take over her bedroom once again to broadcast this. This is her room. She's a college student at UNC Wilmington as well. It runs in the family, I guess. My wife went there. I went there. This guy went there. Colby, welcome to today's Hurricane U. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
All right, so first of all, just a little bit more on your bio. Tell us about Colby Sawyer and your work in emergency management. It's kind of a look at your career, where you've been, and a little bit about what you do there in the Chatham County area.
Okay, so I grew up in the Outer Banks. I grew up on the mainland of Dare County in a small community known as Mains Harbor. A multi-generational family from the Outer Banks. Left to go to school. I attended, as you mentioned, UNC Wilmington and got bachelor's degrees in psychology and criminology. Stayed at UNCW for my master's in public administration. Professionally, I started in emergency services as a volunteer firefighter with the volunteer fire department. Worked my way through that. Worked my way up into the ranks there. Moved over into EM when I was at UNCW and interned with the emergency management office there. Worked for them for a little bit. I then worked for Hyde County. Many people are familiar with Ocracoke is in Hyde County. I then went to work for the North Carolina Ferry System and have now ended up here in central North Carolina in Chatham County. Here in Chatham County, I'm responsible for hazardous materials planning. We are responsible for the nuclear safety program. We have the Harris Nuclear Plant right here next to the county. We respond to major emergencies, things like water rescues, missing person searches. We manage those. Anything that would tax the existing resources or plans or response structures in a region, we specialize in responding to those quickly. And then we do other things, outreach, training, exercises. We apply for grants for various nonprofits. We work very closely with the nonprofits and other county agencies to make sure that we can best serve the citizens before, during, and after a disaster.
So the public doesn't usually hear about emergency managers until there's an emergency generally, unless they go to a town hall meeting for hurricane preparedness or something like that. What is the role of emergency management in a community as a whole, just generally speaking? And then how does that sort of focus in when we're talking about hurricanes? You've had experience out there, mainland Dare, growing up, Hyde County, and you know a lot about it, especially here in eastern North Carolina, very vulnerable to hurricanes. So on a general scale, emergency management does what for the public? And then when there's a hurricane, in this case, that's what we're going to focus on as our disaster. since we're related, doing hurricanes here, Hurricane U, how does that relate to hurricane planning?
Sure. So here in emergency management, we typically divide up into what we call the 5 phases of emergency management. We have prevention, preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. So emergency management and professionals are responsible for developing frameworks for local, state, federal government agencies, nonprofits, private businesses, developing frameworks for them to operate within to make it through the cycle of disasters.
Right.
We start with prevention. Obviously, if we can work to prevent a problem from ever happening in the first place, that would be excellent. We never have to deal with it. But we recognize that we cannot prevent all things from happening. So we move into mitigation. Mitigation is undertaking projects, working on planning to reduce the impact of an eventual disaster. Some examples of mitigation as they relate to hurricanes include raising your house,
right,
or after a flood or before a flood, making sure that your house is raised above the flood elevation, not building in floodplains in the first place, and then buying properties that have been flooded repetitively and turning them into green spaces that can take the impact of the water and not cause damage. Then we move forward into preparation. We have not been able to prevent it. We know that we can't mitigate it any further, the threat, so we move it into preparation. We just start getting ready for that event. We do drills, we do exercises, we meet with our partner stakeholders in the community. We determine what the threat actually looks like for that specific community. We write plans and we test plans to see if how we think we're going to respond will actually be effective. That's one area where we have a lot of community input, is when we develop emergency plans. Right. We like to know what the community thinks of those, because I can say that County X is going to do Y, but if all the people in County X are not going to do that, then there's no need to even put that to paper.
Sure.
So then we move into response. The event has happened. We've prepared for it. We've mitigated as much as we could. We couldn't prevent it. So we actually respond to the life-threatening issues caused by the emergency. In a hurricane, it could be flooding, power outages, any number of things. And once we have completed the life safety missions, during the response phase, we move into the process of recovery.
Right.
Recovery being
takes a
when
while.
we work within the framework of various, many government agencies to try to rebuild or restore services in a better way. It's a way that's more resilient than they were in the first place, which starts to lean us back into prevention and mitigation again. So we work within that cycle within your community.
So the difference there between preparedness and mitigation, and these are some of these nuggets I'm going to try to extract out of this to help people understand, kind of compare and contrast preparedness versus mitigation.
Okay, so let's take, for example, we have a flooding threat. That would be poignant, as we have a very high risk of flooding across central and especially western North Carolina today, right now as we speak. And I believe there's a town up in Michigan actually that's dealing with a dam failure right now. They've had to issue flash flood emergencies and evacuating the town. Mitigation in that instance would be, we take everybody that lives in the 100-year floodplain, and I can get into a little bit more about what those terms mean, but basically, if there's a 1 in 100 chance of your house getting flooded, we take all of those people and their houses are raised. We get them above what that floodplain is. So say there's a 1 in 100 chance of the water at this particular point reaching 6 feet high above ground. We would put your house at 7 feet above ground. That would be an example of mitigation. Whereas preparation is us working on, we're practicing with our swiftwater rescue teams for when we have to come into your house to rescue you, if we do. Working with our partners in our water management places to make sure that we know when they're going to be releasing water, or we know that they can take X amount of water before it starts to flood. Mitigation is trying to reduce the impact. Preparation is getting ready to respond to those things that we couldn't reduce.
Right. So preparedness, I like to think of it too as more preparing for the event itself, whatever the event may be. It's a more short-term situation, and the mitigation is your long-term strategy to lessen the impacts of said disaster over time, which could span years or even decades, if depending on what the situation is. And, you know, I read early on in my career, I learned from some very good people down here in Southeast North Carolina that, you know, mitigation really is the cornerstone of emergency management. That if you can mitigate these damages and impacts up front in the longer term, that helps the preparedness side of things to go smoother. And I just, you know, I never heard of that. People hear that, and we're hearing it a lot now, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to mitigate certain things, and the word mitigation is used a little more and more in social media, and when we hear about even hurricanes, you know, flood threats and so forth. So preparedness versus mitigation for you all out there is a very, very important dual concepts, and I encourage you to read up on that on the web. Use the Google. You know, you have the world's library at your fingertips, if you will. So check that out. Preparedness versus mitigation, very important concepts. All right.
And one other thing, if
sure,
I could,
absolutely.
talk about mitigate. We spend a lot of money on mitigation projects across the country, and it can seem like we're spending a lot of money, too much money on mitigation. However, for years we were taught that our statistics show that for every dollar that was spent in mitigation, we saved $4 in response and recovery down the road. Those statistics have actually been updated now to show that it's a 1 to 6, so that for every dollar we spend in the United States on mitigation projects, we are having to spend $6 down the road in response to recovery.
Yeah, and that's very important, again, in that longer term. You know, people think about, we want you to prepare for hurricane season coming up. That has to do with things like making sure your generator is ready, your automobile is ready to go, if you have to evacuate. Planning and preparing might be a seasonal thing, where, again, very importantly, mitigation efforts like raising your AC unit so that it doesn't get flooded as often or maybe not at all. Flood mitigation on a community scale from either the Army Corps of Engineers or larger projects. There's a lot of that going on. Again, I encourage you folks, check it out, because, you know, it seems kind of boring. Oh man, emergency management and preparedness and mitigation, but it's not. It's actually a very interesting side to this, that there's a lot we can do way ahead of a disaster. And as I often say, if you're prepared for hurricanes, you're pretty much prepared for anything. All right, so in your experiences out on the Outer Banks, you've dealt with evacuation. And that is not a pleasant thing for anybody to have to deal with. Walk us through, based on your experiences and what you've learned over your career, how do evacuations become, how do they get determined? And what's the process? And I know that it can be different in different parts of the country, but the general idea, why do we evacuate people? I know it sounds obvious, but we got to focus here that there is a purpose behind it. What's the purpose of evacuation? Who makes those decisions? And then how is that put into play to get people out of harm's way?
Sure. So first off, the purpose of an evacuation during a tropical event, for example, is to just get people out of harm's way. You take, and I don't want to focus solely on the Outer Banks because there's so many areas.
Right.
That's the area that I'm most familiar with. You know, you take the Outer Banks, for example. There is 2 bridges out of Dare County. You either take 64 or you take US 158. You go into Virginia. That's it. Right. Those roads can only hold a certain number of people per hour. And when an area is fully populated, we have to start evacuating early. We have to make those decisions early, because we have to have time to get people out. We want to get people out because, one, we never know what the storm is actually going to do.
Right.
You know, we have a very strong tropical system coming our way. We can be very confident, but we have been
there's uncertainty.
Surprised in the past by systems that were not strong tropical systems, or systems that weren't even named, that caused significant flooding and damage. So we want to move people out of harm's way. If we know your house is going to flood, if we get you out of that house, when the hurricane is going on, I don't have to risk the lives of 8 to 12 swiftwater rescue technicians to come into your house to get you out of it, or try to fly a helicopter in to get you in the middle of a storm. So one, it's a matter of your safety and a matter of the safety of government and emergency responders. The second thing is when your house is impacted, when your personal life is impacted by a significant weather event, say in this case a tropical system, the government is also impacted.
Yes.
If you can't continue with your daily life, the county or the local level of government can also not continue with their daily, normal, regular life. So if you are reliant, for example, on city water or city electricity, and we cannot provide those things, and we know that a storm is going to impact our ability to provide those services, we need to encourage you to get somewhere where you do have those services.
Right.
Because we know that we're not going to be able to provide those for you.
So evacuation is extremely stressful for people. My family has had to evacuate more out of choice than we were asked to evacuate. And I think recently, I mean, I've had kids and I've been married for quite a while, but let's just look at something recent. When Irma was coming up the coast in 2017, I was very worried about that. I was very worried about Florence. Where my house is, I am not in an evacuation zone. And I chose, with talking to my family, my wife and my kids and everyone, that we would evacuate them to the inland areas up into your neck of the woods to keep them safe from the impacts. I didn't want my small children to have to deal with a hurricane. So there's this concept of, and we'll talk about zones in a moment and get into that in more detail, but there's this concept of shadow evacuation. And so let's kind of jump into that whole concept here, that we know that there are zones. It's not just, the elected officials get on the bullhorn and say, all right, everybody out. There's supposed to be a controlled process. But even within that controlled process, people evacuate that really don't need to. How do you wrestle with that in emergency management? That you got a lot more people on the road. Maybe they're, especially now, Colby, with social media, somebody puts out that some forecast they saw, or somebody hyping up, oh man, it could be category 5, and everybody leaves early, and it kind of throws a monkey wrench into your plans. You have a lot to juggle, don't you?
I'm sorry, Mark. You broke up there at the very end. You're frozen.
Yep, let's try. Let's do this. It might be, I know we talked about this. This is the first time we've had a technical issue. I know that you told me at the top when we were getting set up that you were on a connection there that may not be reliable. So what I'm going to do is we're going to disconnect live television, right, from Colby, and we're going to try again. Why not? What else are we going to do? Just quit? Nope. He was telling me that he was on a secondary connection. Uh-oh. There he is.
There we go. Let's try this one again.
All right. Beautiful.
Sorry about that. We have a little bit of a poor connection here on our secondary network this off camera.
Right. We are all dealing with this. People on Skype, on TV, national network news, you name it.
Absolutely.
So welcome to the program again, Colby. Thanks. We'll deal with these technical issues. I don't really care. I'm just glad we're able to do it. I just roll with it. So I don't know where I got disconnected, but that term, talking about evacuations, and you guys have a lot on your plate. Shadow evacuations, convincing people you need to go, convincing people you don't need to go, please stay put. How do you juggle all of that?
Right. So let's first step back and talk about how the decision is made to evacuate.
Perfect.
In each jurisdiction, one thing you will learn as you research emergency management is that every emergency management office is set up a little differently. In some emergency management offices, it is a single focus, only purely emergency management. In other places, you focus on emergency services. For example, the emergency services director might be over the fire department
Right.
and the EMS. In some places, the emergency manager is the fire marshal. In some places, they come from the sheriff's office. In some places, they're the EMS director. And that's just in North Carolina. As you
Right.
go to other states, every system is a little different.
Yeah.
And as such, every jurisdiction has a little different procedure for how evacuations are determined. One county I'm very familiar with, I can speak to that deals with tropical evacuations frequently. There's a control group made up of the elected officials and the county's manager. That control group takes the information that they are given by the National Weather Service. We rely solely on information from the National Weather Service when making decisions about protective actions and evacuations. In terms of weather information anyway, solely from the National Weather Service. They take that information, they look at what is projected to happen, and they make a decision about who needs to evacuate to, again, meet those priorities we discussed just a moment ago.
Right.
Before we had our glitch about, life safety and preservation. So we know that when people evacuate, they're either going to leave or they're not.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, some people don't listen to the government all the time, and they do not leave when they're asked to. I know, who would have ever thought. But some people do not leave when they're asked to evacuate. There are people who will refuse. They will stare down a Category 5 storm, eye wall impact, because daggone it, they've been here for 50 years and never left, and they're not leaving now. And we know that, and we recognize that. And there's also people we know that might live 40 feet above ground in a cement house, and they're going to leave if there's a tropical depression coming. And if that is what they feel that they need to do to be safe, we would never discourage that.
Right.
And we plan for that. There's a study done every few years by the Army Corps of Engineers that calculates the evacuation times for various regions and various zones across the state. And they put in many different planning assumptions, including we have planning assumptions for the number of people who evacuate. Is it lightly regarded? Do most people leave? Do we have a lot of lead time? Do we have almost no lead time? Is it a short fuse event? And so we can take all that information together, but our plans that have been written going back to preparation, we can't prevent people from evacuating. We don't want to.
Right.
We can't mitigate that. That's the great thing. So we have to plan for that. And when we write our plans, we plan for a bonus number of people to evacuate.
Sure.
Because just anecdotally, if you combine the people who don't necessarily need to evacuate,
right,
and if you replace them with the people who should evacuate and don't, you still end up with about the same volume of people evacuating.
That's interesting. So let's talk about host counties. So along the coast of North Carolina, we have all these coastal counties. There's roughly 21 coastal counties. There's 100 counties in North Carolina as a whole. And so you being in Chatham County, the Raleigh-Durham area, people are going to evacuate from the coast. Let's say a major hurricane's coming. You're a host county, aren't you, for the most part? Let's talk about that a little bit. You have to receive those people in your county, and so it's not just the coastal county's problems, is it?
So that is actually, it's very interesting that you called it a host county, because I thought you were referring to a specific plan we have here in North Carolina. Let me hit generally first. Yes, so when people evacuate the coast, they have to go somewhere.
Right.
And they come inland. And of course, most people who do not have a family member to stay with or a trusted family friend to stay with, and I'd like to talk about some of that towards the end, about how to actually get ready to evacuate your home, what we want you to do and know. But for people who don't have another place to go, they come to the hotels, they come and find any place that they can as far away from the coast as they can possibly make it. And typically we don't have to change but so much, other than we can expect if there's 10,000 extra people in the county, there will be 10,000 people worth of extra medical calls or police calls going on.
Makes
Those
sense.
are things that are relatively easy to absorb.
Sure.
The state also has a plan. It's an established plan that designates risk counties, which are coastal counties, and host counties, which are central counties, wherein a specific county can declare that they are evacuating, and it has already been pre-identified that the evacuees from let's just say Carteret County,
All right.
from Carteret County down in the Morehead City, Newport area, it's already been identified. They will go first to this county, and if this county can't hold any more, then they go to this one. If they can't hold any more, then they go to this one.
Yes.
And those host counties actually establish shelters.
Right.
The shelters, they're called CRESS, Coastal Region Evacuation and Sheltering Plan. They're called CRESS shelters, and we can support people from the coast who are not able to evacuate on their own to a safe place.
Gotcha. So think about, I was much younger, as you were too. Floyd in 1999 triggered this massive evacuation starting in Florida, and then of course we saw it again with Irma in 2017, that you had people passing through states that were not quite ready to evacuate yet, and then they got triggered.
Right.
It really becomes a problem because you've got these different agreements, and before Floyd there really weren't these agreements, and post-Floyd, it's interesting how hurricanes of the past will influence decisions of the future. Now you have these mutual aid and other agreements between the states, because you can't have Florida doing Florida's
Right.
own thing without coordinating with Georgia, that you're going to send all these people, and not necessarily that Florida is sending them there, just people end up, when you trigger an evacuation in Florida, they go somewhere. And as you've said, they tend to go a long way. Augusta, Atlanta, if you're leaving Savannah, you end up in Atlanta, Charlotte, whatever. Charleston is Charlotte. First of all, that's got to be a big headache for you all, because people don't necessarily need to travel 500 miles away. But then secondly, how do you try to tell people, look, you only need to get out of the storm surge zone. There's no reason to drive 7 hours. It's always been a problem ever since I got into this 25 years ago. It doesn't seem like it's going to go away. Controlling the evacuation better.
That's right. So we implemented a few years ago this idea of zone evacuations, where instead of us saying that an entire county needs to evacuate,
everybody, right?
We can say if you live in zone 1 of this county, which say in your plan that zone 1 is the most it's the highest risk,
right,
for whatever threat. We can do it in a little more gradual approach to try not to overload or shock the system. But of course, when we have something like an Irma occurring, or a Florence or a Floyd, and we have this just massive migrations of people, North Carolina has multiple interstates that run through it. I-95
right.
runs right up the middle of North Carolina.
Yes.
If you're leaving Florida or Georgia or South Carolina and want to go anywhere else, there's a very good chance that you're going to hit I-95
right.
until you hit I-40 and then go from east to west in North Carolina. So we work very closely with other states, and that is done at the state emergency management level,
right,
for them to keep a good idea of what's going on. They will let us know in advance, hey, Florida's thinking about evacuating, hey, Georgia, hey, South Carolina's thinking about evacuating. And of course, there's certain things that can happen, with the governor. For example, the governor can issue an executive order that rescinds any restrictions on the amount of gasoline that can be transported in the state,
right,
for example. Or they might open up more roads for truckers to be able to get essential supplies like gas and things in to a region to try to, once again, mitigate any negative consequences of a large evacuation. And in terms of people just taking up and going 7-12 hours away, I'm never going to fault anybody who chooses to evacuate in a hazardous situation. However, if you've done it multiple times and you've always had trouble getting back home afterwards, or you've ended up so far away that you can't keep good contact with your friends or your family.
You start to learn from that experience.
We would urge you to rethink your evacuation process, but not the evacuation in the first place. If you're being asked to evacuate, or even if you're not, if you think that you need to evacuate for your specific reason, then that is excellent. We're very glad you do it. But I think what was it, Burke, who said, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
If we don't learn from our failures, as emergency managers and as local and state governments, we will never improve. And that goes back into that planning piece where we take an event, we take our plan, and it doesn't matter how well written the plan is or how thorough it is. One part of it is not going to work.
Sure.
If every emergency management plan worked, I wouldn't have a job after
Right.
a year. I wouldn't have anything to rewrite.
Right, it'd be a self-solving problem, sure.
That's right. That's right. But we do our best to learn, and of course, the world is changing, and I'll stay away from that. But we, for example, Katrina. Take Hurricane Katrina and the impacts to New Orleans. When New Orleans was flooded, and they had all of these people that they had something to do with,
Mm-hmm.
they just put them on buses and trains and planes and sent them wherever they could go.
Yeah.
And a large number of people into the city of Charlotte to stay in a shelter that was established in the city of Charlotte. And many of those people never left.
Right.
They were in Charlotte for so long, they just stayed and they
Sure.
established lives there.
Yeah.
And
I remember that.
it's just a reminder that there are very far-reaching impacts whenever we make it we mandate the movement of people.
Yeah.
We do our best to make sure that we do it in a smart way.
And it's not taken lightly, folks. You know, we see these evacuation orders come out, and they know there's going to be a big impact on the community, that people are going to be out of work. They're going to have to be doing a lot of stressful things to get ready. It's not just, the government trying to control people. It's trying to keep people safe. And I know that's hard to understand, especially when you sometimes seem to, maybe there's an over-evacuation. Storms have different tendencies to not do what we think they're going to do. It's not a perfect science, and it's tough. So let's just go back to the basics to try to help people understand something. The Office of Emergency Management in any municipality in our country has good information that people can extract if they would just do so. We tell people, when you are trying to figure out your hurricane plan, first determine if you live in an evacuation zone. That's a very, very important thing. You assess your vulnerability, and part of that, you look and you say, do I live where I need to evacuate? So how can somebody, and I know each county is different, but on a general sense, how can somebody utilize the emergency management office in their community? What question would they ask? And what do you think the best way to do so is? You call them up, email, interact on social media. A lot of you have social media specialists now. You've got that information. How do we get it to people?
So just reach out in any way that works for you if you need additional information. We are here to serve the public, and we are here to protect the public. And it may take us, if you send us an email or give us a call, it may take us a little bit of time to get back to you, because, we still have everyday emergencies going on.
Right.
Things are still happening every day. In North Carolina, we are implementing a Know Your Zone initiative. So just if you're in North Carolina, Google NC Know Your Zone.
Makes sense.
And see where you need to go from there. If you are inland or you are in another place, just Google up the number for your local Office of Emergency Management. It might not be called Emergency Management. It might be called your Office of Homeland Security. It could be through your fire marshal's office. But just find out how emergency management is provided in your county, and reach out and call and say, hi, I live at 123 Main Street in Central City. I'm either new to the area or I just really don't know.
Precisely.
Can you help me determine what my level of risk is?
Perfect.
And another great way that doesn't involve reaching out to us includes ask your neighbors.
Yeah.
Especially if you are new to an area, if you have recently moved to an area and the person next to you has lived there for 30 years, ask them.
Yeah.
What kind of hazards have we faced here in the past? Do we have to evacuate often? If I have a question about emergency management, who should I reach out to?
That's a very good point. And let me just jump in real quick. And the ask your neighbor thing, I've seen this from experience, and I'm going to interject here. Colby brings up a great point. Ask your neighbor. It does a few things here. It lets you meet your neighbor, which is very important.
Absolutely.
Do not ask necessarily and use it as a sole resource social media. So you go on your Facebook and you say, hey, everybody, I just moved to such and such a neighborhood. Do I need to evacuate? Because the problem with that is, as you've seen, and you guys know social media now, you don't get the answer you're looking for. You get people telling you stories, and they start telling you horror stories, and then you don't really get down to the core of the apple. People, I see that especially on community forums. So you have a group, a Facebook group about the Outer Banks, and you go on there and you say, hey, I live at so-and-so, I just moved here, I want to know if I'm in an evacuation zone. Somewhere in the 583 comments, you might find the answer to your question. What Colby said is so important. We have social media, we have avatars that represent us now. That's okay, but go knock on the door of your neighbor. You see him out walking the dog, whatever. You say, hey, what's happening? I just moved here, I want to know the deal, and strike up that conversation. It brings you together. That's a good thing. Social media is not quite as social as I think we expect it to be, and you can find the information you're looking for a lot easier. And I've learned that, and you get to know your neighbor, and that becomes helpful down the road. But also, too, speaking of social media, all of these emergency management offices are on social media, and you can tag them on Twitter. Just ask them, hey, I just moved someplace. Where can you give me this information? Where can I find it? As Colby said, they're busy. They're not waiting around, even in Monroe County and down in Dare County, waiting for hurricanes. They have all kinds of other things that they deal with. Colby, the emergency management director several years ago for Brunswick County, and Brunswick County, how vulnerable we are to hurricanes there. He said he's not as worried about the hurricanes as he is Highway 74, 76 going through his county. And you know what that means. That's the disaster that can make him wake up with a phone call in the middle of the night because of all the trucks and whatever. But the point is, folks, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than emergency managers just waiting for hurricanes. So here on Hurricane U, we're talking with Colby Sawyer, emergency management specialist in Chatham County, North Carolina. He's got a lot of experience, both in the work world and just living it along the coast of North Carolina, Hyde County, the Ocracoke area, and then his family, lots of generations there in Dare County, mainland Dare County. That's the Outer Banks. So Colby, talk about, as best you can with your experience here, why sometimes we see an event, a hurricane event, and you might have the mayor on, and in other cases it might be the director of emergency management, and in other cases it's just the governor, and in some cases like Texas it's a judge. That's a weird thing. And in Louisiana it's the parish president. Why isn't it like the movies, where usually in a disaster movie they got one guy that usually is the expert? In The Day After Tomorrow, I know that was a sensational eye candy tentpole movie from '04, but it was the main character there, the guy, the Professor Hall, I think his name was, that was sort of the voice of everything, and he was advising people. How come it's not cohesive around the United States that when a hurricane is coming, here's Colby Sawyer, if you were the director of emergency management, or it's Dan Summers down in Collier, or whoever it may be? I just think that would be more helpful. Why is it so kind of scattered, if you will, if you can talk to that point?
Sure, and I mean I can talk to a small portion of it. And
just some insights.
In some places, political forces are stronger than others, and the people expect to hear from their elected officials. Most emergency managers, believe it or not, are very outgoing people. But if we could stay behind the scenes and you never even knew that we worked for the county, we would take it and run with it.
Interesting.
We want to focus, or at least in my experience, the most emergency managers, we want to focus on getting actionable and accurate information to the public. And the reason that you see elected officials do that in a lot of cases is because they're the people that the public knows.
Gotcha.
The public must know them because they were elected.
Yeah.
And so I can get up there and I might be able to give you a 2-hour lecture about storm surge, but that doesn't mean anything if you don't know who I am.
Gotcha.
But if you have a long-term mayor for a town that's been there 25, 30 years, or you got the chairman
Makes
of the
sense.
board of commissioners who is knows everybody and everybody's business and everything else. That they can be seen as more of a trusted source. So it's emergency management's responsibility to work with those figureheads to make sure that we are getting them the best information to share. And again, we want to share information that is accurate
Right.
and actionable. And that leads me into another point. You might want to talk about it a little bit later. I'm not sure. Talking about where you get your information from.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, what I was going to ask you about that, in fact, and we can just almost jump in feet first there, that how has social media changed your role, not only specifically what you do, Colby, but the emergency manager's role? I mean, boy, talk about putting out fires. You know, let's do it. Let's go ahead and talk about that. Be careful where you get your information. So, where should people be getting their information?
So the best source of information in terms, let's talk about tropical weather.
Right.
Absolutely, you receive your information from the National Weather Service, your local forecast office for the National Weather Service, and every place in America has a local forecast office.
Right.
And from the National Hurricane Center.
That's the top.
Your local forecast office has meteorologists who live and work in that community.
Right.
You know, I come from down at the coast. The forecast, the meteorologist at the Newport Moorhead City office of the National Weather Service, you know, I'm very familiar with. We're friends. We're acquaintances.
Yes, partners. Yeah.
Those are people that are locals, and when they issue a forecast, they're issuing a forecast for their home as well.
Exactly.
When they're giving information to public officials and to emergency managers about whether they need to evacuate an area, they're also talking about evacuating their own homes and their own families.
Right.
They have a vested interest in the community that they are forecasting for. And sometimes you will see things happen. For example, maybe you'll see some model runs, or you'll see some spaghetti plots come out that would be a worst case scenario. And of course, there's no context attached to them. It doesn't tell you that this is the 1 in 1 million chance, and it's going to be a category 5, and it's going to sit over top of you for 3 days.
Yep.
Of course, you know, those are always going to take off. People love sensationalism. People they thrive on that type of thing, especially sharing it, because they know that they're going to be able to get an impact from people, whether it's good or bad. They're going to share it.
Likes and shares.
I'm not going to say don't get your weather from social media. I'm going to say get your weather from trusted social media outlets.
Right.
Get your weather from trusted government outlets. Get your weather from trusted people. If you going back to that neighbor that's lived in the town for 30 years, ask them what the storm is going to do. Now, don't base your decision completely off of what this person that lives next to you says.
Right.
But take that into account. If they said, yeah, for the last 30 years, every hurricane we've had, this road is flooded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fine.
Take that under advisement.
Yeah.
But in terms of social media is such a powerful tool. But it can be used for good and bad.
Sure.
And we see these pages pop up all the time especially during tropical weather season, where it's just there's going to be predicted at the end of June. You know, there'll be a post today. At the end of June, there's going to be a Category 5 hurricane in Miami.
Yep, we see it.
Well, that's right, and it goes all around, and people share that, and it's not, and the people are good at heart. They have received this information that scares them or is important to them, and they're trying to pass that on. They're sharing it. You can't blame them for doing that. But we just encourage people, get your weather from a trusted source, the most trustable of which is, of course, your local National Weather Service forecast office.
Yeah, and you
can
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, and and related to that, your local TV station. You know, the person that's in that community. National news is good on the broader scale, to give you an overview. But when it comes down to it, we think down here in Southeast North Carolina, WECT, WWAY in Myrtle Beach, the Jamie Arnold down there at, now I'm going to draw a blank. Dave Williams, WCIV. These are people that know the communities. And up in Charlotte is Brad Panovich. And it goes on and on and on. Greg Fischel. Skip Waters passed away a number of years ago. That's who I learned a lot from in down east North Carolina. But boy, social media, it reminds me of the old Peter Parker, where his uncle said to the soon-to-be Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And people that have a lot of followers, and even some people that don't have a lot of followers, suddenly get a lot of likes and shares because they happen to grab the very first frame of a deterministic model that shows some nightmare scenario. And like you said, there's no context behind that. It takes off like a big rock rolling down a hill, and you start getting phone calls, and you start getting tagged on social media yourself.
That's right.
What do y'all think about this? And it starts wasting time. But maybe social media will get better since we get more used to it, that people start figuring these things out. We can only hope. So
and one more thing to think about, Mark, in terms of getting information from trusted government sources. There's a high likelihood that the official statements that are coming from the county, that are coming from the town, that are coming from the National Weather Service, from a federal agency, from a nonprofit that is a trusted partner in the community, there's a good chance that those are going to come in slower than something that just gets shared on social media.
Right.
But we, and I can only speak for Chatham County's perspective on this, we will verify information and make sure that it is accurate and actionable before we share it. We're not just going to, we might hear a rumor that a road is flooded. I'm not going to push that out to my citizens until I know, yes, for a fact that road is flooded, and I have determined what those citizens need to do about it, which of course would be turn around and don't drown. So just because a county or a town is not giving you information right away, that doesn't mean that we're hiding anything. That doesn't mean that we are not wanting to tell you something, or that we know something that you don't. It's not that. It's just we want to make sure that the information that we are giving you, we ask you to trust us, and we expect you to trust us to give you good information.
And that process.
We want to make sure that the information we're giving you is right.
Yeah, and the process involved in that to make it thorough and accurate, and like you said, and actionable as well. That leads me into this thought here. Being on the coast like you had for all those years, this concept, you've evacuated and now you want to get back. Let's talk about re-entry and the aggravation. I've seen it. I know. I mean, re-entry is a very tough thing. People want to get back. They want to see their property. They want to get home. They've been stuck at a hotel or maybe an evacuation center. What advice can you give people? It's real easy to just say, be patient. But
it is.
You've also lived through it to an extent. And so you know more about it and I do too, than just be patient. You know what I mean? So let's talk about that. Re-entry is ugly, but it's a necessary part of it, isn't it? And we can do it better. What advice?
It is. So some things to think about when it comes to re-entry is, if there is a re-entry process or re-entry priorities, there's a reason that we can't just let everybody back in at one time. We know that if we do, the system that we have will become overloaded. Take, for example, the Outer Banks after a storm goes through and all the power poles get knocked down. There's no power anywhere on the Outer Banks. It would not be wise for those officials to let people back in right away, because then you're going to have to be dealing with all the impacts of the hurricane, and you've got 30,000 people or 40,000 people who don't have power.
Right.
When it comes to things like food supplies, grocery stores being restocked. If a jurisdiction gets hit by a hurricane and all the people leave, the grocery stores get destroyed, or there's no steady food supply. When those many people come back without any sense of order, or without any foreplanning, not only do you have the disaster that was the tropical system and the disaster that was the loss of infrastructure, but now you have the disaster of mass feeding. Or mass care, or sheltering. And sheltering, and I'd like to talk about sheltering too before we end. Sheltering is never pretty.
Nope.
And so re-entry is a methodical process. Yes, we know that everybody wants to get home and see how their home fared. We know that. We know that it might take longer for you to get back than you expected.
Right.
But that is solely a matter of safety
Yeah.
for you and the responders. If the county has been destroyed, and we have fire departments out working to just clear roads
Right.
and make sure that there's nobody stuck in houses that have been flooded.
Mm-hmm.
If we work that, then we let all these people back in. People still have emergencies. People have heart attacks in the middle of hurricane.
Yep.
People have babies in the middle of hurricanes. It happens.
Right.
And so if the government infrastructure can't support the services that we are to provide the people, then we don't want to let people back in and fail them.
Exactly. Right. It's a weird double-edged sword there, that you got this influx, people want to get back, but boy, it has to be balanced exactly right. And it's interesting because it also goes the other way. I was stuck, quote unquote, on the Outer Banks after that coastal storm in November, and I wasn't allowed to leave. And it wasn't really a problem. I had a house that I could stay in. It was just the road, Highway 12 out there, and it was 5 days. And I know, well, that's my career. It's what I do. What do you expect? And you just have to be patient. Food Lion down at Avon or whatever it was open. They had food. It's not like I was suffering, but I got a little bit of a taste of it, because rarely have I ever been not allowed to get into an area after I've evacuated, because it kind of goes different for me. I try to get out, but this was one event where I couldn't get out. So I got to see it sort of from the inside, and those hours and days do start to weigh on you. And I just want to get home, see my family, and whatever. I'm trying to leave the disaster. That's a little strong of a word for what the coastal storm was, but we do have, and the point here is, as you in emergency management, we have empathy for you folks. We know. You all know that. And it is not just a willy-nilly, well, we're just trying to control people or whatever. If you get out there and there's power lines down, you just let everybody out and you just run amok, there's going to be massive, massive problems. And to be patient and understand it's a coordinated effort is very important. So sheltering, how are shelters, that's a good topic here. Who chooses where the shelters are? We hear about American Red Cross shelters, and that's a heck of a process in and of itself, isn't it, to choose a shelter location?
Yes. So sheltering is a beast, for lack of a better term. Because you are trying to set up, likely in the gymnasium or cafeteria of a school, a livable space for up to, there's some shelters in North Carolina now that have been identified that could hold over, close to or over 1,000 people. You think about 4 people in a family, they can't get along. Imagine trying to get 250 families all put together who've evacuated from a hurricane and tell them you're going to get, crackers and water and a boxed meal a day, and you can't be loud after 9 p.m. and you can't be up walking around after, before 6 a.m. And there's so many rules and procedures that we have to keep these shelters as a safe place. We never want to, we will absolutely open a shelter if it is necessary, but we encourage everyone that when you think about how to evacuate and where you're going to evacuate, you are going to be taken care of in a shelter.
Yeah.
But it is not a fun place to be.
Right.
And most local governments today, the first question they ask after they open the door to the shelter is, when can we shut it?
Right.
When can we help these people get back to what their normal daily lives are?
Yeah.
Because that's not a normal function of government.
Yeah, really.
And another thing to think about in terms of evacuations is maybe you don't live in an evacuation zone or a storm surge area, but you were dependent on electricity for some type of home medical equipment.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you were dependent on medication that has to be refrigerated.
Right.
Or frozen. Think about the fact that, yes, your house might not flood, but you might lose power for 2 weeks. Do you have a generator and 2 weeks worth of fuel supply?
Right.
Do you know that your generator is going to work? If you can't work your generator on your own, or do you have someone who can get it going for you? Those are all things to think about when you are determining whether you need to evacuate or not.
Right.
Even if the local jurisdiction has not placed a mandatory evacuation order in effect, if you are a vulnerable person it may be wise for you to evacuate. And that goes back to having a plan for what you're going to do. Do you know where you're going to go? Have you called your family? You know, you live at the coast. You have family that lives here in Raleigh. Call them up every year, the first hurricane season, and just say, make sure. You know, we're going to do our chat this year on hurricanes, and we're just going to make sure, are we still good to come?
Right.
What do we need to bring? What can we bring? Just make sure that whatever your plan is, one, that you have a plan.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Really.
two, that you're still going to be able to do it.
Right. And I mean, it sounds like not silly, but we talk about hurricane preparedness every year, and it starts to become routine for people, and it's like, hurricane preparedness again. But folks that have been through it, and what Colby is talking about is so important. And again, it sounds like, well, you got to have that talk. We have different talks in life about different things, and those of us that live in hurricane prone areas, you have to talk about this stuff. You do have to address it, because I'm telling you, at the end of it, it helps. It's not going to eliminate all your problems. The only way to do that is just to leave the coast and move somewhere else, and then you have other problems wherever you moved, probably.
That's right.
Unless you move to San Diego, California, and then you're pretty good to go for the most part. But honestly, you got to have those talks with people, and Colby's offering up some great advice. People, family, friends, inland, and they don't have to be in Chattanooga, Tennessee, for goodness sakes. And if they are, okay, good. Maybe go up there and have a time of it, spend a few days with them. It's interesting, people that evacuated Wilmington for Florence, I know of several people that said they went to Orlando and went to Universal or Disney World.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, whatever you got to do, I guess. So before we let you go, in your experience, what are some mistakes that people have made that you see repeated over and over, some pitfalls that we can try to help people to avoid? If you could rattle off a few off the top of your head, you've seen it time and time again, what might those be?
Sure. So one big one right off the bat, and hopefully before your series is over, you could do a session on this, is on financial preparedness. Being financially ready for an impact from a hurricane or any other type of disaster. And a big portion of that comes in the form of insurance. Having insurance is one of the best ways to protect your investment, that is your home and your property. For flood insurance, for example, if you don't have flood insurance, call your insurance agent and ask what it would cost to get that, because most home insurance plans do not cover floods. It may cover wind-driven water, but if the water comes up from the ground,
right,
if it's storm surge, you might not cover it.
Right.
And it's not a conversation you can have a day before the hurricane hits.
And Colby, let me jump on top of that. What he just said about the conversation. Getting insurance and having the proper insurance, whether it's in a lot of homeowner policies and a lot of mortgages, I should say, mandate that you have to have wind insurance, and some of them are going to mandate that you have flood insurance. What Colby said about that conversation is absolutely paramount. And we are, in June, I'm going to get somebody on. We're going to talk specifically about insurance. Yeah. It's not enough to just go get the policy. I implore you to get to know your agent, if you can, if it's local. Find out as much as you can about what that policy does and doesn't cover, maybe some history. And you're going to have to do some homework here. The burden of responsibility is on you. You buy the insurance, you need to know exactly what you're getting, how it works, what the process is to make a claim, and maybe some history on how that insurance company has dealt with hurricanes in the past. Because as I am learning, ever since Michael, and we saw it in Katrina, there is a big battle that goes on between wind and surge and flooding as a whole, between insurance companies and the insured. Whether you're a business or just an individual homeowner or a family, it is absolutely paramount. You don't just go buy the insurance and that's the end of it. You put the policy in the drawer or save the PDF file into a folder on your desktop and that's it. I'm telling you, you've got to understand your insurance, and if at all possible, get to know your local agent if that's who you bought it from. Who do I call? Just really, we're talking, as Colby said, that is a huge investment. You're trying to protect your home or your business. it's not enough just to have insurance. You need to try to wrap your brain around how that insurance works.
And one last thing, I know we're getting on an hour, but one last thing I definitely want to share is the tendency for people to become hurricane weary.
Right. Oh yeah.
And the tendency for people to become
it's exhausting.
Hurricane invincible.
Right.
In terms of becoming storm weary, this is going to be an interesting year for America as we face the tropicals, as we face the Atlantic Pacific hurricane season this year.
No doubt.
People are already tired. People are already at their wits' end.
Sure.
With other things that are happening in life. There's no telling. You can go, months and months and just have a storm come over you every month for 3 of them.
Yeah.
Or you might go a whole year and you don't see a rain cloud the entire time.
Sure.
But don't fall into a pit of despair or sadness or frustration with the weather. The weather is the weather. The weather is not out to get you.
Right.
The weather there is no control behind it. It is not coming to target, a storm is not going to come target the United States just because it's 2020.
And no matter what you hear on social media, that is correct.
That's right. There's the statistical probability of us having a storm has been the same as it was from the get-go. It doesn't matter whether we had
1,000 years ago or now. That's right.
It doesn't matter. If we're going to have a storm, we're going to have a storm, and if we're not, we're not.
Mm-hmm.
And the other end of that is feeling invincible. Oh, well, I've ridden out all these storms, and I've never had a problem at my house. I've never had an emergency.
Yep.
Think about the people who lived through Andrew down in Florida.
Right.
And they say, well, I lived through Category 5 Andrew down here in Florida. And they lived, 30 or 40 miles from Miami.
Yeah.
Well, no, you didn't live through hurricane. You lived through the outside of Hurricane Andrew.
Right.
You didn't live through that eye wall.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And just remembering that you're not invincible. The picture that hangs in my office is a picture of Hurricane Irene just prior to landfall. My family has always been very confident with storms. That storm flooded one of our family's homes.
Yeah.
We evacuated, and we got a call saying the water is in the house. And that was not something we expected. Even though we know that the storm surge is a thing, and it's a threat, we never expected that to happen.
Yeah, every one of them is different. And
absolutely.
That's something that's very hard to translate to people. They think they know based on past experience. I remember Max Mayfield, former director of the National Hurricane Center, he was the director during Hurricane Katrina, that he said something like, Camille killed more people in August 29th, 2005 than it did August 17th, 1969. How did it do that? And I thought that was a brilliant way to look at it, is that so many people in Mississippi, of those that died, thought, oh, I made it through Camille, this is, I'll be fine. And unfortunately, they lost their lives. And every single situation is different. And I've talked about this often since the dawn of this COVID-19 situation. And we're all over it. We're done with it in terms of we're exhausted from it. But as he talked about, as Colby said, we've dealt with that. We're kind of tired from it. It seems like a hurricane exercise. We've been waiting and wondering. It's very similar parallels. And no, the weather is not out to get us. And I've been promoting this idea. Look, let's use the weather experience that we have to our advantage. Unlike the virus, you can't see it coming. You cannot be in the store and know necessarily that person has it. I better stay away from them. That's why we do all these things with the social distancing and the masks and all these other things that have radically changed our lives. But on the flip side, even as we're dealing and we're talking about this cyclone that has affected Bangladesh and India as an example, we know that that's a very vulnerable area of the world. Hundreds of thousands of people have perished, and in some cases maybe even millions in past cyclone events. That's the constant. The variable is the cyclone. It's going to be different every time, but we had advance warning. And, hopefully people there we're able to take advantage of that advanced warning. We're in 2020 now. We have the technology, social media, science, etc. And the same holds true for us in the United States and in the surrounding nations of the Caribbean and elsewhere. We have history on our side, experience, and technology, and I think that's a positive. That's not going to make the Category 5 that might come later not happen, but it doesn't even matter. It could be just a tropical storm that parks over your area. You get 40 inches of rain, and it's catastrophic at your house. So I like what Colby said, that, don't, and I know it's easy for me to sit here and tell you, don't despair, don't worry about it. I mean, I'm with you. I live in Wilmington, North Carolina. My house could be destroyed in a tropical storm if a rain band produces an EF3 tornado that happens to go over my neighborhood. I know that. I'm with you. I empathize. And so when we say, don't let it just make you hopeless, don't, because you do have the knowledge base of past experience, and for better or for worse, the internet to take advantage of. And I know I'm kind of lecturing everybody here, but boy, that's so important. Just try to stay positive. PMA, man, positive mental attitude. Would love to have you back later on in the season to pick up on some additional topics. We're going to do that. Anything pressing before I let you go that you want to make sure we talk about today?
Well, that's it. Just everybody, stay safe, make a plan, practice your plan. If you have a plan, break it out and make sure it's still valid. Do like we do with just like with the Harris nuclear plant, our nuclear plant here. We have to break out the plans and test them every 2 years to make sure that they are still top notch. Take that right down to your household level, as simple as, if the house gets on fire, where are we going to meet up? Where are we going to go? If we have to evacuate, where are we going to meet up? Where are we going to go? Just think about that and do your part to stay safe, and we'll do our part to help you.
Yeah, and I had one question I want to make sure I asked before I let you go. We've talked a lot about what emergency management does. As we finish this up, what doesn't emergency management do for people? And that's a different way to put it. So we expect certain things. What can people sort of not expect? What are you not going to be able to do just by the simple virtue that that's not what you're here for? You know what I'm saying? So how do people look at it that way?
So obviously we cannot prevent all things from happening. If we could, we'd be worth our weight in gold. We are not going to be able to come into your community and stop a problem from happening. If your community experiences some type of weather or threat frequently, we can offer you tips to mitigate that threat. We can offer you tips on how to prepare for it, how to respond to it. We can help you recover after it has come, but we're not going to be able to stop that threat from occurring, especially if it's weather. If it's a natural hazard, we can't control that.
Right.
And the other thing is, we can't, as much as we would love to just stroke a blank check and fix every single problem that exists, we don't have that option. So we have to prioritize funding for different projects. So granted, yes, I think that a road, a private driveway that has 2 houses down it, where the road washes out every time it rains, is just as important as a major highway that washes out every time it rains. But if that major highway supplies a neighborhood of 10,000 people, that's the one that we have to focus our money on repairing.
Gotcha.
And so just that would be the one thing we don't do, is we can't just come in, stroke a check, let the good idea fairy take it and run.
Well, I'll say this, and this could open up a whole can of worms, and we'll maybe be an interesting discussion for later. After Michael, and I've done this for 25 years, but after Michael, something just kind of struck me, and I thought about it. I was like, why don't we have, and I don't know what it was too, it was the different fights that I was seeing between insurance companies and the property owners down there, and I was in the middle of this because I had the video from Mexico Beach that was very definitive in showing that the wind came in Category 5, and it was this amazing evidence, and that's a whole other thing that I'm helping out in some legal issues, because we do have evidence this time. And I thought about it. It's like, let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, that just looking at Mexico Beach, just isolate that and say there's $1.7 billion of replacement cost. And again, just hypothetical. why not just write a check from the federal government? I know people, this is where it's going to get upsetting to people, but I will, and make them whole. Because what good is it to leave these places shut down, businesses, homes, etc.? And I understand people are going to start, oh, I'm not paying my tax dollars to rebuild those places. The people chose to live on the beach. I would say, well, we're spending tax dollars to go rebuild countries after we go in and get involved with war. And everybody seems to be, well, not everybody, but you see where this could get really hairy. But then we had the pandemic, and $2 trillion was spent to prop up the country, and another $3 trillion may get spent. And so, I don't know, and this is not a solvable thing today, but let me just put it this way. If somehow I had $10 billion in cash sitting in the bank, I would have gone in and said, all right, Mexico Beach and other places, 2 cans of Mexico Beach destroyed. How much does it take to build it back? $3.7 million. Done. Get them back. Pop's grocery store in Pender County that got flooded by the river in Florence served a community of 300 people. I'm just making this up, but you get what I'm saying. 2 cans was the largest employer in Mexico Beach, from what I understand. Pop's grocery store is the cornerstone of that neighborhood. And what does it cost to fix it back? $350,000. Do it. Period. Because it brings back the economy. It brings back tax dollars. You start, you know what I mean? It's almost like, well, Mark, maybe you should run for president someday and make that happen. It's just.
I was going to say, Mark, if you can come up with the answer for that, I think there's a director's level position up at FEMA waiting for you.
But I mean, it's frustrating because, people don't choose for these disasters to happen. And yes, I know, again, we could go off for hours on this and debate either side, but, the government is not set up right now to write a check to just make everything better. And that's what I wanted you to talk about, that that's just the way it is. But it is interesting that we saw a time here with this pandemic situation that the government wrote a check for $2 trillion to try to help things get better. If you just needed $10 billion to fix a hurricane area, I don't know, just something to think about down the road, a national disaster relief fund just to get communities back. If I were to run for president, that would be one of my platforms. Not happening, I'm just saying. But it's very serious, people, because in the aftermath, it is extremely difficult. And people like Colby, people like I mentioned, Dan Summers, and I know of others out there in emergency management, as much as they would like to come in and just wave a magic wand or write checks and it's just done and fixed and we're going to take care of you, it's not that easy, and we're all in it together at the end of the day. It is a very tough process. The hurricane is over. Whatever the disaster is, the flooding, the dam that just broke there in Michigan, they're going to be dealing with that. Whatever the case may be, the aftermath goes on for generations. And, after the story itself of the hurricane fades from the headlines. Well, Colby, let's talk about this again sometime. We'll think of some almost like debate points, if you will. Who knows? It's a very interesting subject. Like I told you at the top of the broadcast here, one of the very first influencers on my life was an emergency management director, Dan Summers, and I'll never forget it. And learning from him, and I've met a lot of you all throughout my career, face to face, and even where he is in interior North Carolina, get a good look at Colby's face there, because in a disaster, all of us that deal with this, we start getting big bags under our eyes. So have some empathy for that guy as well, and his colleagues elsewhere around the country. All right. So Colby, thanks a lot. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you all very much.
Good luck up there in the new position in Chatham County. And if there's any hurricanes headed your way, maybe I'll cross your path there, our paths in your neck of the woods, and we can find a Five Guys. That's an inside joke somewhere around there when they open up for us to go in again. But anyway, crazy that we're talking about all that. Colby, thanks a lot. So look,
Thank you.
This is the last of the Hurricane U for now, because I got to do some testing. We're doing some stuff next week out in the Great Plains, getting ready for hurricane season. So sometime in June, this will pick up again. I am going to get an insurance person. I got to pick the right person, somebody that can sort of take the heat, because we are going to talk about, I never wanted this to ever be confrontational. I'm just not very good at that. And that's why I don't have my own political show on a major news channel. among other reasons. But I do want to talk about the difficulties in why it's not easy for people to get claims solved. So I got to find somebody that can sort of take that heat without just passing it off as whatever. But yeah, we do want to talk about insurance, and we're going to and eventually other topics to help you get ready and further expand your mind as we talk about hurricanes. And if you're ready for a hurricane, you're ready for just about anything. As always, we are supported by our patrons from Patreon to make this available to everybody. So thank you to our group of supporters, both our patrons and our HurricaneTrack supporters, over the many years now that you have made crowdfunding a big part of how I am able to do this as a career. Thank you very much. And again, thanks to our guest, Colby. I'm Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll be back with another Hurricane U for you sometime in the month of June, and then it'll be hurricane season. Thank you for watching. We'll speak again in a few weeks.